Station Kelmer hung in the void like a rusted crown, its metal spires catching the distant light of twin suns that barely warmed the outer rim. The massive trading hub processed minerals from nearby asteroid fields, and every surface bore the scars of decades of hard use and harder profits. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the viewport of his merchant vessel Wanderer, watching the docking procedures with practiced patience. He had visited hundreds of stations across human space and beyond, but something about Kelmer always left a sour taste in his mouth. Docking clamps engaged. His engineer Ben Carter called from the control panel, his weathered hands moving across the interface with easy familiarity. "We're locked in tight, Captain." Jake nodded and turned from the viewport, his boots echoing on the metal deck as he walked toward the cargo bay. The Wanderer carried machine parts and medical supplies bound for the colony worlds beyond the rim. Nothing exciting, but good honest trade that kept his crew fed and his ship flying. Airlock hissed open, and the familiar smell of recycled air hit him, mixed with something else he could never quite identify on Kelmer. It reminded him of desperation and sweat. The odor of too many bodies working too hard for too little. Ben joined him at the airlock, his gray eyes narrowing as they stepped onto the station proper. "How long are we staying this time?" "Just long enough to offload and pick up the return cargo," Jake replied, scanning the crowd moving through the docking area. "I want to be out of here by tomorrow evening." They made their way through the industrial section, where cargo loaders and dock workers moved with the tired efficiency of people who had long since stopped expecting better. Jake noticed most of the workers were Draxian, their scaled skin dulled by exhaustion and poor nutrition. The Draxians were impressive beings when healthy. Their reptilian features gave them a dragon-like appearance that had earned them that nickname among humans, and their natural strength made them ideal for heavy labor. But these workers looked nothing like the proud species Jake had read about in the cultural databases, a Vexian overseer, his blue skin marked with the commercial tattoos of the consortium, barked orders at a group of Draxian workers unloading containers from a transport. The workers moved quickly, but not quickly enough for the overseer's satisfaction. "Move faster, you worthless beasts," the Vexian shouted, his three-fingered hand gripping a shock prod. "The consortium doesn't pay you to waste time." One of the Draxian workers, an older male with graying scales, stumbled under the weight of a container. The Vexian immediately activated the shock prod and jabbed it into the worker's side. The Draxian cried out and collapsed, his burden crashing to the deck with a metallic clang. The other workers froze, their expressions carefully neutral as the overseer kicked the fallen Draxian. "Get up," the Vexian demanded. "Get up, or I'll dock your entire week's pay for damaged equipment." Jake felt his jaw tighten, but Ben's hand on his arm stopped him from intervening. "Not our station," Ben murmured quietly. "Not our jurisdiction." They walked on, but Jake couldn't shake the image from his mind. He had seen injustice before in the far reaches of space, had witnessed the exploitation that flourished beyond the Galactic Council's watchful eye. But something about the casual cruelty bothered him more than usual. At the cargo processing center, a bored Vexian clerk barely looked up as Jake submitted his manifest. "Offloading will begin at 0600 station time," the clerk droned. "Processing fees are standard, plus the new administrative surcharge, plus the equipment rental fee, plus—" "I know the fees," Jake interrupted, keeping his voice level despite his irritation. The fees at Kelmer had tripled in the past year, but the station maintained a monopoly on several key trade routes after securing their berth and arranging the cargo transfer. Jake decided to walk through the station's commercial district. Ben went back to the ship to run system checks, leaving Jake to navigate the crowded corridors along the commercial district, catered to traders and merchants, with shops selling everything from exotic foods to illegal weapons. But even here, Jake noticed the Draxian workers cleaning floors and hauling waste, their movements mechanical and joyless, he stopped at a small cafe run by a Tellurian merchant, ordering a cup of their bitter tea and settling at a table near the window overlooking the lower levels. From this vantage point, he could see the worker dormitories, cramped buildings stacked like boxes in the station's bowels. First time noticing? A voice asked Jake turned to find a human woman settling into the chair across from him. She wore the uniform of an independent freight hauler, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. Noticing what? Jake asked cautiously. The way they treat the Draxians, she said, gesturing toward the lower levels. I'm Captain Lynn Parker, independent hauler. Been coming here for 3 years, and it gets worse every time. Jake introduced himself, and Lynn continued, her voice low and angry. The Vexian Consortium controls this station, and they exploit every legal loophole in the Galactic Council's labor codes. They classify the workers as contract labor instead of station residents, which means the workers have zero legal protections. How do they get away with it? Jake asked as though he already suspected the answer. Money, Lynn said bluntly. The consortium greases the right palms at the council, and nobody asks too many questions. The Draxians came here after their homeworld had environmental problems, and Vexians promised good wages and safe conditions. But they don't deliver. Jake finished. They pay starvation wages when they pay at all, Lynn confirmed. I've seen them withhold payment for invented infractions, charge workers for equipment damage they didn't cause, and impose fines for violations of rules that don't exist. The Draxians can't leave because they have families here and nowhere else to go. Jake stared into his tea, feeling the familiar weight of helplessness that came with witnessing injustice beyond his power to fix. Has anyone tried to help them? Lynn's laugh was bitter. Who would? The other species don't care, and humans have no authority here. I filed a complaint with the Galactic Council once, and they sent back a form letter saying they'd investigate. That was 2 years ago. They sat in silence for a moment before Lynn stood to leave. Watch yourself, Captain Morrison. The Vexians don't like people asking questions. After she left, Jake remained at the table, watching the workers in the lower levels. From this distance, they looked like insects scurrying through a hive. Individual lives reduced to functions in a machine that ground them down day after day. His communicator chirped and Ben's voice came through. Captain, we've got a problem with the cargo manifest. The Vexians are claiming 3 containers are overweight and want to charge us extra handling fees. I'm on my way, Jake replied, rising from his seat as he walked back toward the docking area. He passed through a section where workers were gathering for their shift change. The Draxians moved in weary groups, their conversations quiet, and defeated one female Draxian caught his attention. She was younger than most of the workers, her scales still holding some of their natural green luster, despite obvious signs of malnutrition. She walked with 3 small Draxian children clustered around her, their large eyes watching the world with the wariness of those who had learned early that life offered little kindness. The children's ribs showed through their thin scales, and Jake felt something twist in his chest. He had a daughter back on Earth, safe and comfortable in a world where children didn't go hungry. The female Draxian noticed his stare and pulled her children closer, her expression guarded. Jake nodded respectfully and moved on, but the image stayed with him. He didn't know then that he would see her again soon, or that her desperate plea would change everything. The cargo dispute with the Vexian dock master took 3 hours to resolve and cost Jake an extra 1,000 credits in fees that shouldn't have existed. By the time he left the administrative office, his patience was worn thin, and his opinion of Station Kelmer had sunk even lower. Ben was waiting in the cargo bay, supervising the offloading process with the careful attention he gave to everything involving the Wanderer. Robbery, he muttered when Jake told him about the fees. Plain and simple robbery with official stamps on it. At least they're letting us trade, Jake said, though the words tasted bitter. The ship's medic, Lisa Hayes, joined them carrying her supply inventory. "We need to restock medical supplies before we leave," she said, consulting her datapad. "The colony worlds always need more antibiotics, and the prices here are better than at the core stations." Jake nodded his approval, and Lisa headed toward the commercial district. He was about to return to the bridge when his communicator chirped with a message from the station's supply depot. "Captain Morrison, your order of water reclamation filters is ready for pickup," the automated message informed him. "Please collect within 2 hours or storage fees will apply." "More fees," Ben grumbled. "They probably charge you to breathe the air here." Jake decided to collect the filters himself rather than sending a crew member. The walk would give him time to think about their next destination and clear his head from the frustration of dealing with Vexian bureaucracy. The supply depot was located in the lower industrial section, the same area where he had seen the Draxian workers earlier. The corridors here were narrower and more poorly maintained, with flickering lights and walls stained by years of neglect. As Jake approached the depot entrance, he heard raised voices echoing from around a corner. Something in the tone made him slow his pace and listen. "Please, I only need my wages," a female voice said, the words thick with an accent but clear enough. "My children haven't eaten." "Please, just what I earned this week." Jake recognized the desperate quality in that voice. He had heard it before in war zones and disaster areas. The sound of someone pushed past pride and begging for basic survival. He rounded the corner and found himself looking at a small office where a Vexian paymaster sat behind a reinforced window. On the other side stood the female Draxian he had seen earlier with her children. Her hands pressed against the glass in a pleading gesture. "Your performance this week was substandard," the paymaster said in a bored tone, not even looking up from his datapad. "Multiple demerits for slow work pace, plus equipment damage fees, plus the mandatory administrative processing charge. Your wages are forfeit. I caused no damage." The Draxian woman protested, her voice breaking. "I worked every shift. I followed every rule. My children are hungry. Please. The sensors logged damage to loader unit 47 during your shift." The paymaster interrupted. "The cost of repairs exceeds your weekly wage. In fact, you now owe the consortium 300 credits. The woman's shoulders slumped as if struck. "How can I owe you money?" "I worked 60 hours this week. 72 hours, the paymaster corrected with a thin smile. "Which means you're also being fined for excessive overtime without proper authorization. That's another 100 credits. Jake felt rage building in his chest, but forced himself to remain still and observe. Around the office, other Draxian workers waited in line, their expressions resigned to whatever injustice would be served to them. "I have 3 children, the woman said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "They haven't eaten in 2 days. I'm begging you, please, just give me something. Take it up with your supervisor," the paymaster said, waving her away. "Next." The woman stood frozen for a moment, her whole body trembling. Then she turned and walked away, her movements stiff with suppressed emotion. Jake watched her go, saw her pause in the corridor and lean against the wall, her scaled hands covering her face. The other workers in line looked away, unwilling or unable to offer comfort. The rage in Jake's chest crystallized into something colder and more focused. He walked past the pay office and followed the Draxian woman at a respectful distance. She walked without apparent direction, her steps automatic as she navigated corridors she obviously knew well. Finally, she stopped at a junction and simply stood there, staring at nothing. Jake approached slowly, making sure his footsteps were audible so he wouldn't startle her. "Excuse me," he said gently. The woman spun around, her eyes wide with alarm. Up close, Jake could see she was younger than he had first thought, probably not much older than 30 in human years. "I don't want trouble," she said immediately, her body tensing as if preparing to run. "I'm not here to cause any. Jake assured her, keeping his hands visible and non-threatening. I overheard what happened at the pay office. I'm sorry. The woman's expression shifted from fear to humiliation. You're human, she said, as if that explained something. Yes. Captain Jake Morrison. I run the merchant ship Wanderer, he introduced himself. What's your name? She hesitated before answering. Kira. Kira, when did your children last eat? Her jaw tightened, and for a moment Jake thought she would refuse to answer. Then her shoulders sagged again. 2 days ago. I gave them my rations, but the portions are small. Jake pulled out his credit chip. Let me transfer some credits to you. No. Kira's response was sharp and immediate. I don't take charity. I worked for my wages. I earned them. You did earn them, Jake agreed. And they were stolen from you. This isn't charity, it's justice. But Kira was already backing away. I can't. If the Vexians see me taking money from outsiders, they'll use it as an excuse to deport me. Then my children will have no one. Where is their father? Jake asked gently. Pain flashed across Kira's face. Dead. Mining accident 4 months ago. The consortium said he violated safety protocols and denied any death benefits. They said he was responsible for his own negligence. I'm sorry, Jake said, and meant Kira's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I need to go. My children will be worried. She turned and walked away quickly, leaving Jake standing alone in the corridor. He watched her disappear around a corner and felt the weight of helplessness settle over him again. But this time, something was different. This time, he had seen her face, heard her voice, witnessed the casual cruelty that reduced a mother's desperation to a line item on an accounting sheet. He returned to the supply depot and collected his water filters in silence. The clerk barely acknowledged him, and Jake was grateful because he didn't trust himself to speak civilly back on the Wanderer. He found Ben and Lisa in the common room sharing a meal. They took one look at his face and exchanged glances. What happened? Lisa asked. Jake told him about Kira and her children, about the stolen wages and the invented fees. As he spoke, Lisa's expression grew increasingly horrified, and Ben's jaw set in a hard line. That's monstrous, Lisa said when he finished. Those children are starving while their mother works herself to exhaustion. It's not our problem, Ben said, but his tone lacked conviction. We can't fix every injustice in the galaxy. I know, Jake said quietly. But I can't stop thinking about her. About those children, Lisa stood and paced the small room. We have medical supplies. I could at least check on the children. Make sure they don't have malnutrition-related illnesses. The Vexians won't allow it, Ben warned. They don't let outsiders into the worker dormitories. Then we don't ask permission, Jake said, the decision forming even as he spoke. Lisa, can you put together a medical kit? Something small and portable? You're going to get us banned from the station, Ben predicted, but he was already moving toward the equipment locker. I'll get you a scanner. If you're going to break rules, at least gather evidence while you're at it. Jake smiled, despite the weight in his chest. Thanks, Ben. That evening, Jake made his way to the worker dormitories using directions he had gotten from a sympathetic Tellurian shop owner. The dormitories were exactly as grim as he had imagined. Rows of tiny compartments stacked in buildings that seemed designed to house the maximum number of bodies in the minimum amount of space. He found Kira's unit number and knocked gently. After a long moment, the door slid open a crack and Kira's face appeared, her eyes widening in shock. Captain Morrison? How did you find? I need to speak with you, Jake said. Please. Just 5 minutes. Kira glanced behind her nervously, then stepped out into the corridor, letting the door close. You shouldn't be here. If the Vexians find out, I brought medical supplies, Jake interrupted, holding up the small pack Lisa had prepared. And I want to help you children. Not charity, not pity. Just basic decency. Kira stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then tears began sliding down her scaled cheeks, and she covered her face with her hands. Why? She whispered. Why would you care? You don't even know us. Jake thought of his own daughter, safe and fed and laughing on Earth. Because someone should, he said simply. Because your children are hungry, and that's not acceptable. Not anywhere, not to anyone. Kira lowered her hands and looked at him with something like wonder. You really mean that? I really do. Jake confirmed. She took a shaky breath and opened the door wider. Come in, meet my children. The interior of Kira's compartment was smaller than Jake's personal quarters on the Wanderer. 3 children huddled on a single sleeping mat in the corner, their large eyes watching him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. It's okay, Kira told them in their native language, then switched to standard. This is Captain Morrison. He's a human. He wants to help us. The oldest child, a female with scales beginning to show the green coloring of adulthood, looked at Jake with open suspicion. Humans don't help Draxians, she said in careful standard. Teacher said humans only care about profit. Your teacher was wrong, Jake said, kneeling down to be at their eye level. Some humans care about what's right. He unpacked the medical supplies while Lisa had included basic nutrition supplements, antibiotics, and a portable scanner. The children watched with wide eyes as he activated the scanner and explained what he was doing. This will tell me if you're sick, he said, running the device over the oldest child first. It doesn't hurt, I promise. The scanner's readings made his stomach tighten. All 3 children showed signs of severe malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, and stress-related health problems. The youngest had the beginnings of a respiratory infection that could turn serious without treatment. Jake administered the antibiotics and showed Kira how to use them. Then he distributed the nutrition supplements, small packets that would provide essential vitamins and minerals. These aren't meals, he warned. But they'll help until we can figure out something better. The children devoured the supplements like they were delicacies. Watching them, Jake felt his resolve harden into something unbreakable. Kira, I need your permission to do something, he said. I want to document what's happening here. The malnutrition, the wage theft, all of it. And I want to make sure people know. Kira's expression turned fearful. The Vexians will retaliate. Not if we do this right, Jake interrupted. I have contacts in human space, journalists who specialize in exposing corruption. Once the story is out there, the Vexians won't dare touch you because too many people will be watching. You don't understand, Kira said, her voice desperate. The Galactic Council doesn't care what happens to us. We've tried complaining before and nothing changed. The consortium has too much power. Jake stood and looked down at the children, at their protruding ribs and dull scales. Then we make the council care, he said. We make this too big to ignore. He left the compartment with Kira's reluctant permission and a portable drive full of medical scans and recorded testimony. Back on the Wanderer, he called a crew meeting. Ben and Lisa listened as he outlined his plan. When he finished, Ben shook his head. This is going to cause us nothing but trouble, he said. The Vexians will ban us from every station they control, probably. Jake admitted the Galactic Council might sanction Earth for interference. Lisa added, they might. Jake agreed. Ben sighed and pulled up a communications interface. Then we better make it count. What's the name of that journalist friend of yours? Jake smiled. Nicole Grant. She works for the Solar Broadcasting Network. Within an hour, Jake was on a secure channel with Nicole, a sharp-eyed woman who had built her career on exposing corporate corruption. He transmitted the medical scans and recordings, along with his own testimony about what he had witnessed. Nicole's face grew grimmer as she reviewed the evidence. This is good work, Jake, she said. Really good. I can have this on the evening broadcast. But you know what's going to happen after. I know. Jake said. Do it anyway. The story went live 6 hours later, broadcast across human space with the headline Draxian Families Starving While Working for Galactic Corporations. Nicole had added interviews with labor rights experts and legal analysts, who pointed out the loopholes the Vexians were exploiting within 12 hours. The story had spread to other species' news networks. The images of Kira's children, their ribs showing through their scales, became a rallying symbol across dozens of worlds, but Jake didn't wait for the media storm to build. The next morning, he requested a meeting with the station administrator, a Vexian named Dex, who held absolute authority over Kelmarthex, kept him waiting for 2 hours. A petty power play that Jake endured with patience. When he was finally admitted to the administrator's office, Dex didn't bother standing or offering a greeting. Captain Morrison, Dex said, his voice cold. I understand you've been spreading lies about station operations. I've been documenting the truth, Jake corrected. Wage theft, child malnutrition, unsafe working conditions. All verifiable facts. Dex's blue skin darkened with anger. You have no authority to investigate station affairs. You're a merchant captain, nothing more. I'm a witness, Jake said calmly. And I have evidence of crimes being committed against sentient beings. That gives me not just authority, but responsibility. The Draxian workers are contract labor, Dex said. Their treatment is within the bounds of galactic law. Then galactic law is wrong, Jake interrupted. And needs to change. Dex stood abruptly, his three-fingered hands slamming on the desk. You dare lecture me about law? You humans with your primitive sense of morality think you can dictate terms to civilizations that were exploring the stars while your ancestors were living in caves. Jake met his gaze without flinching. Those cave-dwelling ancestors taught their children something important, that watching suffering and doing nothing makes you complicit in it. Get out of my office, Dex hissed. And get your ship off my station. You're banned from Kelmer effective immediately. Fine, Jake said. But you should know that 20 human merchant captains are watching this conversation through my comlink. Ban me and you ban all of them. Your station processes 40% of its cargo through human vessels. Can you afford that? Dex's expression froze. You're bluffing. Jake activated his communicator and 20 voices responded in unison. All human captains, confirming they were monitoring the situation. We stand with Captain Morrison, one voice said. Whatever decision he makes, we follow. The color drained from Dex's face as he realized the implications. Banning human ships would cripple Kelmer's economy within weeks. This is extortion, Dex said, but his voice had lost its certainty. This is negotiation, Jake corrected. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to pay the Draxian workers their full wages, with back pay for every credit you've stolen. You're going to improve their living conditions and provide adequate food rations. And you're going to allow independent observers to verify compliance. And if I refuse? Jake smiled without warmth. Then every human ship in this sector reroutes around Kelmer. The consortium can explain to its shareholders why profits dropped 40% because you wanted to steal wages from desperate mothers. The silence stretched for a long moment. Finally, Dex spoke through gritted teeth. I'll need to consult with consortium leadership. You have 24 hours, Jake said. After that, we start rerouting. He left the office knowing he had won this round, but also knowing the fight was far from over. The consortium wouldn't accept this defeat without attempting to strike back on the Wanderer. He found his crew waiting with a mixture of pride and concern. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen. Ben said, probably both. Jake admitted. Lisa pulled up a newsfeed. Look at this. The story's gone viral across the galaxy. Other species are coming forward with similar complaints about Vexian stations. Jake watched as the reports scrolled past, each one detailing exploitation and abuse that had been hidden in the legal shadows. His single act of defiance had opened a floodgate. His communicator chimed with an incoming message from Nicole. "Jake, you need to see this. The Galactic Council just announced an emergency session to discuss labor practices in the Outer Rim. This is actually happening." That evening, Jake visited Kira's compartment again. Word had spread among the Draxian workers, and a small crowd had gathered outside, their expressions hopeful for the first time since he had Arvid. Kira met him at the door, tears streaming down her face. "Is it true?" she asked. "Are they really going to help us?" "They're going to try," Jake said carefully. "But you need to be ready. The Vexians are going to fight this, and it might get ugly before it gets better." "We've survived ugly before," Kira said, her voice stronger than he had heard it. "At least now we have hope." Jake looked at the gathered workers, at their faces showing the first sparks of defiance after months or years of defeat. "Hope is a start," he said. "But hope alone won't feed your children. We need to make sure this changes, really changes." An older Draxian male stepped forward. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "What do you gain from helping us?" Jake thought about how to answer, about all the complicated reasons that had brought him to this moment. Finally, he settled on the simple truth. "Because I saw a mother begging for wages to feed her children," he said. "And I couldn't walk away from that. Because if we let injustice stand when we have the power to fight it, we become part of the injustice." The crowd murmured in their native language, sounds of agreement and wonder mixing together. "The galaxy is watching now," Jake continued. "And humans have an annoying habit of not letting go once we decide something matters. So get ready, because things are about to change." The Vexian Consortium's response came faster and harder than Jake had anticipated. Within 48 hours of his confrontation with Administrator Vex, formal complaints had been filed with the Galactic Council against Earth for unauthorized interference in sovereign station affairs. Jake sat in the Wanderer's common room watching the council proceedings on the view screen. Human diplomats were scrambling to defend his actions, while Vexian representatives painted him as a rogue agent, acting outside any legal authority. "They're calling you a pirate," Ben said, reading through the official documents, "claiming you threatened violence against station personnel and engaged in economic terrorism." "Economic terrorism," Jake repeated, shaking his head. "I threatened to take my business elsewhere." "Since when is that terrorism?" Lisa entered carrying 3 cups of coffee. "Since it threatens to cost them billions in lost revenue," she said. "The consortium is panicking because 6 other stations have reported similar protests. Workers across their entire network are demanding the same protections you got for Kelmer." Jake took the coffee gratefully. "Any word from Earth Command?" "They're backing you, officially," Ben said. "But the diplomatic corps is furious. Apparently, we've created what they're calling the biggest interspecies labor crisis in Council history." "Good," Jake said. "Maybe that means they'll actually do something about it." The door chimed, and Jake granted entry. Captain Lynn Parker stepped in, looking exhausted but triumphant. "You beautiful, reckless fool," she said to Jake. "You actually did it. Did what?" "Made them care," Lynn said, dropping into a chair. "I just came from a meeting with 20 other independent captains. We're forming a coalition to support the worker protests. No more cargo runs to any station that doesn't meet basic labor standards." Jake felt a surge of hope. "That's huge. It gets better," Lynn continued. "The Tellurian Union just announced they're pulling their contracts from Vexian stations until the labor issues are resolved. And the Kantari Commerce Fleet is considering the same." Ben whistled low. "The consortium must be losing their minds." "They are," Lynn confirmed. "Which is why you need to watch your back. Desperate corporations do desperate things, as if summoning them." Jake's communicator buzzed with an incoming message marked urgent. He opened it to find a terse summons from Administrator Dex. He wants to meet, Jake said. Alone, in his private office. That's a trap, Ben said immediately. Don't go, but Jake was already standing. If I don't go, they'll say I'm afraid to face them. Besides, I doubt they'll try anything too obvious. Too many eyes watching now. He went anyway, with Ben tracking his position remotely and Lisa on standby with the ship's medical bay. The walk to Vex's office felt different now. Workers who had previously avoided eye contact now nodded respectfully as he passed Vex's office was empty except for the administrator himself. He stood at the window overlooking the station's industrial sector, his posture rigid. Captain Morrison, Dex said without turning. Thank you for coming. What do you want? Jake asked, remaining near the door. Dex turned, and Jake was surprised to see no anger in his expression, only weariness. I want to offer you a deal, the administrator said. The consortium is prepared to compensate you handsomely if you publicly retract your statements and leave the station. How handsomely? 5 million credits, Dex said. Enough to buy a new ship, retire comfortably, never work another day. Jake considered the offer for exactly 3 seconds. No, Dex's face hardened. You're making a mistake. The consortium has resources you can't imagine. We can make your life very difficult. You already tried that approach, Jake said. Threatening me, threatening my crew. But here's what you don't understand. I don't care what you do to me. Those children I saw starving in cramped rooms care about their next meal, not your threats. Noble, Dex said with heavy sarcasm. But ultimately pointless. The Council will never pass meaningful labor reforms. Too many corporate interests, too much money at stake. Maybe, Jake acknowledged. But you're missing something important. I don't need the Council to act. I just need to keep the pressure on until you can't afford not to change. And if we simply wait you out? Humans have short attention spans. In a few months, this will be forgotten. It won't, Jake interrupted. Because this isn't just about attention anymore. This is about precedent. Every worker in the Outer Rim now knows they can fight back. Every species that's been exploited knows there are allies who will stand with them. Dex walked to his desk and sat heavily. You've unleashed something you can't control, he said quietly. The stability of interspecies commerce depends on established hierarchies and accepted practices. What you're doing threatens to upend everything. Good, Jake said. Maybe everything needs to be upended. He left the office and made his way back to the Wanderer, his mind racing. Dex's warning bothered him not because he feared it, but because it suggested the consortium was preparing for a longer fight over the next week. The situation on Kelmer grew increasingly tense. Vexian security forces increased their presence in the worker sectors, attempting to intimidate the Draxians back into submission. But something had changed in the workers. Zemskira had become an unofficial leader, speaking to other workers about their rights and organizing peaceful protests. Jake visited her compartment regularly, bringing food and supplies while documenting the continuing abuses. They cut our rations again, Kira told him during one visit. Said it was punishment for the protests. But we're not backing down. Her children looked healthier now, thanks to the nutrition supplements Jake and other sympathetic humans had been providing. The oldest daughter had started teaching younger workers to read Standard, using educational materials donated by the human crews. How are you holding up? Jake asked. Kira smiled, and for the first time since he had met her, it reached her eyes. Better than I have in months. I know that sounds strange considering everything that's happening, but having hope again makes even the hard days easier. The consortium offered me money to leave, Jake told her. 5 million credits to walk away. Kira's expression didn't change. And what did you say? I said no, Jake replied. This isn't about money. I know, Kira said softly. That's why we trust you. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A Vexian overseer named Kelm approached Jake in the commercial district. Looking nervous and afraid. "I need to speak with you," Kelm said quietly. Privately, they found a corner in a rarely used maintenance corridor. Kelm glanced around constantly, as if expecting to be discovered. "I've worked for the consortium for 15 years, Kelm began. "I've seen things that keep me awake at night. Things I've done that shame me." Jake waited silently, letting the Vexian continue at his own pace. "The worker death rate," Kelm said. "It's not accidents. The consortium knows the equipment is faulty, but replacing it would cut into profits. They've been falsifying safety reports for years. Can you prove it?" Jake asked. Kelm pulled out a data chip. Maintenance logs, incident reports, internal memos discussing cost-benefit analyses of worker lives versus equipment upgrades. Everything you need. "Why are you doing this?" Kelm's shoulders sagged. "Because I have children too. And I realized that if someone treated them the way we treat the Draxian workers, I would want someone to stand up for them. You showed me that standing up is possible." Jake took the data chip carefully. "The consortium will destroy you when they find out." "I know," Kelm said. "But I can't keep being part of this." "Not anymore." That evening, Jake transmitted Kelm's evidence to Nicole, along with a request that his identity be protected. The story broke the next morning. Vexian consortium knowingly endangered workers to maximize profits. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Species across the galaxy who had maintained neutral positions suddenly demanded council action. The consortium's stock value plummeted as investors fled, fearing legal liability, but the consortium's response was equally swift. They announced a complete lockdown of Kelmer Station, cutting off all non-essential communications and barring any ships from leaving. Jake found himself effectively imprisoned on the station along with his crew and the other human merchants. Ben immediately began working on ways to bypass the communications blackout while Lisa stockpiled medical supplies. "They can't hold us forever," Jake said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "They don't need forever," Ben replied. "Just long enough for people to stop paying attention." But the consortium had made a critical miscalculation. By locking down the station, they had also trapped dozens of journalists, independent observers, and representatives from other species. And those people were now witnessing firsthand the escalating tension on the 5th day of the lockdown. Vexian security forces attempted to arrest Kira. They claimed she had incited violence, though witnesses confirmed she had only organized peaceful protests. Jake and a group of human crew members stood between the security forces and Kira's compartment. "You're not taking her," Jake said firmly. The security chief, a Vexian twice Jake's size, glared down at him. "Move aside or be arrested for obstruction." "Arrest me then," Jake said. "Arrest all of us." Behind him, 20 humans stood shoulder to shoulder, none of them backing down. The security chief hesitated, clearly not expecting this level of resistance. "This is your final warning, and this is ours, Jay." The Galactic Council's emergency session convened on the 8th day of the Kelmer lockdown, broadcast across every major news network in the galaxy. Representatives from 200 species gathered in the council chamber on the core world of Nexus Prime. Jake watched the proceedings from the Wanderer, along with most of Station Kelmer's population. The Vexian consortium had reluctantly restored limited communications after dozens of species demanded transparency. The council speaker, a dignified Arcan named Veln, called the session to order. "We are gathered to address accusations of systematic labor exploitation in the Outer Rim territories," Vel announced. "Specifically, practices employed by the Vexian Commerce Consortium." The Vexian delegation immediately objected, their lead representative arguing that the council had no jurisdiction over private commercial operations. But the speaker silenced them with a gesture. We have reviewed evidence submitted by multiple sources, Vaughn continued, including testimony from workers, medical scans documenting malnutrition and abuse, maintenance records showing deliberate safety violations, and communications proving corporate knowledge of these conditions. On the view screen, images appeared. Kira's children with their ribs showing, work logs falsified to hide injuries, messages discussing the acceptable mortality rate for workers. Jake recognized much of it as the evidence he and Kelm had provided. The Vexian representative attempted to argue that the evidence was fabricated, but species after species stood to share similar stories from their own encounters with consortium stations. Tellurian merchant described watching workers collapse from exhaustion while overseers threatened them with deportation. A Kantari ship captain testified about finding workers living in conditions worse than her cargo hold. Even a Borean diplomat admitted their government had overlooked these abuses in exchange for favorable trade terms. The testimonies continued for hours, building a damning portrait of systematic exploitation that had flourished in the shadows of galactic commerce. Finally, the human ambassador to the Galactic Council, a sharp woman named Patricia Cole, stood to speak. The Vexian Consortium has operated under the assumption that profit justifies any action, that the vulnerable can be exploited without consequence, she said. Captain Jake Morrison proved them wrong. Not through violence, not through military force, but through the simple act of refusing to look away from injustice. The Vexian representative sneered. One human merchant's opinion is shared by hundreds of species, Ambassador Cole interrupted. The evidence is overwhelming. The question now is whether this council will act or whether we will continue to allow corporate interests to override basic, sentient rights. The debate raged for another 6 hours. Finally, the council speaker called for a vote on the proposed Workers' Protection Act, legislation that would establish minimum standards for all contract laborers, regardless of location or species. The vote was not unanimous. Corporate-aligned species attempted to block or water down the provisions, but public pressure was too intense. The act passed with 73% approval, a landslide by council standards on Station Kelmer. The announcement was met with stunned silence, followed by erupting cheers. Jake watched Draxian workers embrace each other, saw human crew members celebrating, witnessed species from across the station coming together in shared relief. The lockdown ended within hours. Administrator Thex appeared on the station-wide communications, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. By order of the Galactic Council, Station Kelmer will comply with the new labor standards, he announced. All workers will receive full back pay for wages improperly withheld. Living conditions will be upgraded to meet minimum standards. Independent observers will be permitted to verify compliance. Jake made his way to Kira's compartment through corridors filled with celebrating workers. When he arrived, he found Kira surrounded by her children and dozens of other Draxians, all of them talking excitedly about the changes to come. Kira saw him and pushed through the crowd. Without a word, she embraced him, her scaled arms strong and her gratitude palpable. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." "You did it," Jake corrected. "You stood up when it would have been easier to stay silent. You believed things could change." Kira pulled back, tears streaming down her face. "But you showed us how to fight. You proved that someone cared." Over the next week, the transformation of Station Kelmer was remarkable. The consortium, facing intense scrutiny and the threat of criminal charges, moved quickly to implement reforms. Worker rations were increased, living quarters were expanded and repaired. Safety equipment was upgraded, and most importantly, wages were paid in full. Jake watched as Kira received her first full paycheck under the new system. The look on her face when she counted the credits was worth every moment of conflict and uncertainty. "This is enough to buy real food," she said in wonder. "Not just rations, but actual food." My children can have fresh vegetables and protein. Her children clustered around her, the oldest daughter reading the pay statement with growing excitement. Mama, it says you earned overtime bonuses too. That evening, Kira invited Jake to share a meal with her family. It was the first real meal she had been able to afford in months, and watching her children eat their fill made Jake's throat tight with emotion. I need to ask you something, Kira said as they ate. Why did you help us? Your people gained nothing but trouble from this. Jake looked at the three young Draxians, so different from his own daughter back on Earth, but deserving of the same chance at happiness and safety. I have a daughter, he said. She's about your oldest age. When I saw your children hungry while you worked yourself to exhaustion, I thought about what I would want someone to do if she were in that situation. And what would you want? For someone to care enough to help, Jake said simply. For someone to stand up and say this isn't acceptable. That's all I did. Kira shook her head. You did much more than that. You gave us hope. You showed us we matter. The news of the Workers' Protection Act spread rapidly across the galaxy, and the effects rippled outward in ways Jake hadn't anticipated. On other consortium stations, workers began organizing, demanding the same protections Kelmer had won. Species that had accepted exploitation as inevitable began questioning those assumptions. 3 months after the council vote, Jake received a message from Nicole. She had been tracking the Act's implementation across dozens of stations, and the results were encouraging. Worker mortality rates had dropped by 60%. Wages had increased by an average of 40%. And living conditions had improved dramatically. You started something important. Nicole told him over the communication link. Labor organizers across the galaxy are using your example. They're calling it the Kelmer precedent. The idea that standing up for the vulnerable can create real change. Jake felt uncomfortable with the attention. I didn't do anything special, he protested. I just couldn't walk away. That's exactly what makes it special, Nicole replied. Most people can walk away. You chose not to. He returned to Kelmer several times over the following months, bringing cargo and checking on Kira and the other workers. Each visit showed new improvements. Better equipment, safer working conditions, worker councils that gave laborers a voice in station operations. On his 4th visit, Kira met him with news that made him smile. My eldest daughter has been accepted into a Galactic Council educational program, she said, her pride evident. She studies xenobiology at the Institute on Nexus Prime. That's wonderful, Jake said sincerely. It wouldn't have been possible before, Kira continued. Workers' children weren't eligible for council programs, but the new regulations changed that. My daughter will have opportunities I never dreamed possible. She handed him a carefully written letter. She wanted me to give you this. Jake opened it and read the simple message written in careful. Standard. Thank you for seeing us when others looked away. Thank you for hearing my mother when she pleaded. I will study hard and make you proud. He folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket. I'm already proud, he said as he prepared to leave Kelmer that evening. Jake stood at the Wanderer's viewport and looked out at the station. Lights glowed in the worker dormitories, brighter and more numerous than they had been months ago. People moved through the corridors with purpose rather than defeat. Children played in common areas that had been created from former storage spaces. Ben joined him at the viewport. You know, this is just the beginning, the engineer said. There are hundreds of stations out there, thousands of places where people are suffering. I know, Jake said. And you're going to try to help all of them, aren't you? Jake smiled. Not all of them. But when I see something wrong and I have the power to act, I'm going to act. That's who I am. That's who humans are, Ben corrected. We can't stand seeing injustice without trying to fix it. It's both our greatest strength and our biggest weakness. As the Wanderer prepared to depart, Jake's communicator chimed with incoming messages. Captain Lynn Parker was asking for his advice on a labor dispute at another station. A Kintari Workers' Council wanted to know how they had organized on Kelmer. A human journalist was requesting an interview about the ongoing reforms. He answered them all, offering what help he could, sharing what he had learned. The Kelmer precedent